Before we start, just a couple of organizational announcements. So, first of all, for today, it's very important that we start on time, because as you may have seen from the agenda, lunch will be late. And if we are late, lunch will be even later. And we want to avoid that. So let's try to start on time. Lunch is foreseen for 1 o'clock, 1:30. We'll have a coffee break at 11. So manage your sugar levels accordingly. Then this afternoon we have foreseen the social event, the workshop dinner, which will take place at a local restaurant. We'll give a bit more information about where it is and how you can get there in the afternoon. Okay? In general, you should have all registered for the social event. In case you have not registered for it but would still like to participate, please let us know. I don't think it should be a problem in terms of number of places available, but please do let us know. And then I have another small announcement to make. You should have all received this morning at around 7:30 an email regarding the registration to the capacity building. Now, it would be important for you to answer that small poll on whether you participate or not, and give your email address in case you participate, because the colleagues responsible for the capacity building need to set up some accounts, if I understood correctly, based on who is going to participate, right? So if you are planning to participate in the capacity building, please register, answer the short poll that you received via email this morning. All right, and with that, with these announcements, I think we can start with the first session of the day, which is about SDMX.io. It will be chaired by our BIS colleague, Brian Buffett, and I'll leave it to Brian then to start the proceedings.
Thanks a lot, Luca, and good morning, everybody. I think yesterday was an incredible day with all of the AI discussions in the morning and the great presentations in the afternoon, so it's a tough act to follow, but let's see what we can do. The session today will be for 2 hours. There are 6 excellent presentations. It's a mix of just an overview of SDMX.io, what it is, where we've been and where we're going, along with the results of an IFC survey on SDMX open source tools, as well as various tools that are part of the ecosystem. So the Python PySDMX library, the TCK for testing the APIs, the FMR Workbench, and how it allows you to use the FMR's capabilities for non-FMR registries, and that'll, as well as the SGDS, which is, I think, going to be new and fresh for everybody who hasn't. First time it'll be shown is today, so, and it's part 1 of part 2, so it'll be continued tomorrow. It's that good, so we look forward to getting that kicked off as well and introducing that to you. So on that note, I'm making the first presentation, so I'll just continue over here. And I'm not going to introduce myself again because I think Raphael did that yesterday, so thank you very much for that. And off we go. Okay, so SDMX.io. That slide was supposed to be up during the introduction. This is just an update, again, for those of you, there's some new people in the room that has introduced yesterday, and new colleagues, I'm sure, joining online that haven't seen this before, so I'd like to just reintroduce it for all the new faces. So it's a single point, it's not a single project, this is actually an ecosystem. It's a persistent initiative that of open source tools, patterns, guidance, learning materials, as well as easy to install environments such as Docker containers. It's all about open source software and resources, so software releases, e-learning courses and webinars, and knowledge articles and use cases. There's a governance model around it that's been established and is in place with prioritization in various user groups for the tools. And it went officially public in 2023 after the approval of the SDMX sponsors. So what's it about from a mission perspective? It's sharing software tools and components based on SDMX, complement existing tools in order to achieve the use cases, interface SDMX with other standards and tools, as well as to promote reusability of SDMX software. So the achievements to date is we've expanded the ecosystem with a range of tools, and we'll be seeing some of those later in the session. We've introduced many upskilling articles and e-learning sessions and webinars. So with 3 webinars, which are highly appreciated and participated in, along with 8 e-learning courses around modeling and other key tasks that you need to be able to do to get started with SDMX.io. We've established a number of partnerships. The partnerships can take various forms, either contributing tools, contributing expertise, contributing e-learning. There's a range of it. It's all outlined in the MOU that all of the partners end up going through and signing. And if you're interested in talking more about this afterwards, please come and talk to me or Raphael. We have a number of partners across a range of organizations, so international organizations and sponsors, the central banks, national stats offices, as well as private sector organizations. And we've also undertaken a situational assessment of central banks by running a survey that we'll be presenting. Bianca and I will present the final results on later in this session. As far as what we're working on, that was introduced a little bit yesterday. The various AI initiatives, both in collaboration with other partners, as well as the SDMX chatbot that was presented. There is a lot of emphasis on the data producer side of SDMX. We're launching a new stream of work around the data user side of SDMX. There's well over 100 organizations currently producing SDMX data, and we're looking to engage with data scientists on both helping them find SDMX data and then helping them use SDMX data. So we're looking forward to moving forward on that. It's being kicked off formally at IFC conference in Rome next February. The ecosystem has been expanding, so the SDMX Thon and PySDMX integration has been completed. Javier and Xavier will be presenting that later in the session. There's good progress on VTL and FMR integration to start showing real use cases and implementations of VTL, which has been talked about for a long time. So this is really exciting. Has a lot of potential. And the tooling around for data scientists, which will come out as part of the gathering of the use cases. And there's an initiative on BIS called LinkageX, which is producing such as PySDMX. There's also Jingado, which is a machine learning library for economists and so forth. So we're doing work in that area from various perspectives. A lot of the courses that we're focusing on now for this fiscal year is focusing on task automation and usage of the API, as well as partnerships. We've onboarded some new organizations and are continuing with discussions with a number of others. So the ecosystem, as it currently stands, is a collection of open source software and tools cooperating. So this is the key, and I think that the single one tool does all model has a very short life expectancy, if it has any life expectancy anymore. So the whole idea is to have smaller tools, bring them together in an ecosystem and have them work together. And if you have open source tools that you're producing and you'd like to consider having them on SDMX.io, then please, again, reach out and get in touch with us. As well, to have a better sense of all of the tools that are available for SDMX, the tools catalog on sdmx.org has recently been updated just last week or 2 weeks ago. So please go and check that out. And I think you're going to find, if you've looked at it in the past, it's significantly better, and the tools have all been cleaned up. So the strategy that was taken in refreshing that was no tool stays unless somebody actually comes forward and says, here's the updated information, that this is accurate and current, and please keep our tool on the site. So you can have a good level of confidence that whatever you find there is an actively maintained and active and current tool. So just in graphics, here's the look at the partners that we currently have, or either signed or close to being signed from an MOU point of view. We have a range of international organizations and sponsors, central banks, national stats offices, and private sector organizations. And what are we doing from a collaboration perspective? So with the IMF, IMF is now powered by FMR 11 since late 2023. We're working closely with SISTC and Eurostat on achieving STMX3 compliance. We'll talk a little bit more in the STMX3 session tomorrow on that point. With the OECD and SISTC, this is the FMR workbench discussion. This is a result of the initiative and the use case brought forward by the National Bank of Belgium. The FMR was actually evolved into the creation of an additional tool, FMR Workbench, and Jose will be presenting on that later in this session. The next presentation, as a matter of fact. And also, the NBB is leading the user group for FMR Workbench to drive the direction of that product as it goes forward, which is a really exciting initiative too, to have that owned by outside of the tool producer community. So Eurostat is working with us on the STMX reference infrastructure to get it to be STMX3 compliant through the harmonization of the STMX core libraries, Java and .NET libraries, to get them both aligned. Bank of Italia and INSEE Making Sense is where the initiatives are taking place for VTL and FMR integration, primarily working with UNSD on SDG use case. And then, as mentioned earlier, Meaningful Data has been working with us, and we've completed the STMX Thon and PySTMX integration. So what does some of this look like? What does an ecosystem look like in practice? So this is the .stat Suite Eurostat BIS environment as far as how where the tools are. So .stat Suite is being produced by the OECD. It's dependent on the STMX RI from Eurostat, which is using its own STMX source.NET libraries. .stat Suite's also using the FMR Workbench from the BIS. And then BIS and Eurostat are collaborating on the core libraries, both for the Java and .NET versions, to get to STMX3 compliance. So this is an ecosystem that we're talking about when we're trying to look at how tools can come together to provide solutions. So the upskilling courses that we produced, and again in the top right, there's a link to, not a very pretty link, but it's a link to the stmx.org e-learning catalog that was refreshed earlier in the year. So this is a collection of all of the STMX e-learning courses across organizations. It includes the work presented by Stefan yesterday from the ADB. It includes all the .stat Academy courses, BIS courses, and courses from other organizations as well. And these are the STMX.io specific ones that we've produced, both from an e-learning course perspective as well as an expert article perspective. And the way that we're approaching e-learning on STMX.io is just to keep all of the modules to 30 minutes. So it's easily consumable within an acceptable time commitment. In addition, e-learning courses that are underway. As mentioned earlier, we're looking at all task automation and using the API. That's the focus for this year. And our year goes to end of March, so keep that in mind. And we're also looking to launch 3 more webinars between now and end of calendar year, both introduction to PySTMX, so this is giving like a practical how-to from a data producer perspective, introduction to the Jingado machine learning library for economists, and then introduction to, and this is a practical how-to as well, the FMR Workbench. Now it's a collaboration between the BIS, OECD, and the National Bank of Belgium. And that's it. Thank you very much. Sorry about that. So I don't have time left for questions because we're a little bit slow getting kicked off. So in the interest of keeping on time, we'll take questions at the end of the session. But Jose, please. Oh, hold on. Give me 1 second while José's getting set up to just introduce him in his session. So as mentioned, José's from National Bank of Belgium. He's going to be presenting the FMR Workbench. And let me just get to his bio here. So after 30 years in the IT department, José crossed over and became a business analyst in the statistical department. His first project was a re-engineering project at External Statistics Service to establish a fully SDMX compliant bidimensional database for aggregated data. His current project is SALSA, where at the core of the system is the .stat suite, and they use tools such as the Data Lifecycle Manager, Data Explorer, along with FMR Workbench and VTL Suite. As a business analyst, he assembles and describes the user requirements throughout the full data lifecycle, and as well, José is actually actively involved in communities of practice for various internal domain working groups where they define the structure, content, and purpose of the data. José, over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. So they asked me to tell something more about the usage of FMR Workbench. So as we know, you have to manage your SDMX artifact, you need a tool. So a little introduction. So in the bank, our system is based on the Stat Suite. We have different spaces in which we have stored data and our SDMX artifacts. So the first thing when we do start modeling is using the Excel SDMX matrix generator. It's very easy to, when you start up, you can define your concepts, code list, everything, data flows. You can discuss with your data owners, and you can create an XML file which you can upload in the DLM, Data Lifecycle Manager. When artifacts are stored in the Data Lifecycle Manager, it's not that easy to use Data Lifecycle Manager to manage your SDMX artifacts. You have to do an export on the Data Lifecycle Manager. You receive an XML file. You can edit it, use XML Spy, so then you can edit your XML file and you can upload it again to have your new version of your SDMX artifacts. But the thing that we will use, the application that we will use is FMR Workbench. So I prepared a little demo, not live demo, because when you use live demos, it's always very dangerous. So I made a little movie. I will start from the Excel matrix generator, and I show some examples. You see code list. Why code list? Because code lists are very important in our case in National Bank because we have multi-language. So we have to create all our labels in different languages, so English, Dutch, and French. So, and then I will show something, how can you change your SDMX artifacts for visualization purposes. Oh, sorry, the movie. Oh, I have to escape, sorry. Up. Yes. So we'll start the movie. So as you can see, this is an example of the SDMX matrix generator, where you can define your concepts, you can combine code lists to them, you can create your code list also in the SDMX matrix generator. You define your DSDs, your data flows, you combine your in data flows DSDs with the dimensions that you want, and you do generate SDMX artifacts. It's very short, but that creates an XML file. You load it up in the Data Lifecycle Manager. So there you see you have your different spaces, and also all the artifacts you can manage or view. So I give an example of a code list. So you select an example given in a sector code list. And when you view it, you see it's a large XML file. When you need to modify this by using XML, it's not very user-friendly. So I go to the FMR Workbench. Here you can see we can also select our spaces. So we have connection to different spaces like I shown in the introduction. So now we're using the staging space. We do login, otherwise we don't have access to create or modify artifacts. So here you can see also your artifacts, data structures, items like concept schemes, code list. And as said, I will give an example of a code list. So how can we create a new code list? So it's very easy. You type a name. It's an easy presentation for me. We choose our agency because we are BE2, and I give it a name. But like I said, we need also other languages. So we also we add the language, and we say, oh, we want Dutch, NL, and we add it. We also give it a label, so we have also the label in the Dutch language. And you click on next. And here you can enter codes in this screen. So I did an example. You type, for example, a new code, A, and I put it in Dutch. It's jaarlijks. And it's comma delimited. You click to next, and it's all inserted into your code list. As you can see, you go to the next screen, but it's in English, because the default language was English. But I added the name in Dutch, so now I can change it. I do edit, I do English, and all. Click on finish. When you view your code list, you have the English. When you change the default language, in the home page, you have Dutch language. So normally we receive lots of code lists from institutions with only labels in English. So how can we manage them? I did also a little code list with only description in English. So we asked to our translation office, translate all these codes in Dutch, French, and then we need to upload these languages. So I do edit of the code list. I add the language because it's only English. I need to add also in Dutch. Give it a name. And then you go back to, again, to the import codes, the next wizard. And here you see, now I want to add the language in Dutch. So we received, for example, an Excel file. We'll show it, where we have the codes with the Dutch translation. So we copy these two columns into this screen. It's an Excel file, so it's tab delimited. Click tab. You go to next. And you can do it with 1,000 or 2,000 records also. So it's very easy, very user-friendly. As you can see now, also description in Dutch. Another example I want to show is for visualization purposes. I created a data flow in DLM. So also on the staging space, or the same space I'm using in the FMR. And you can see in this, the data is just very simple data structure definition. We got the rubric and we got the countries. So there's someone at the bank that says, okay, I want, on this DSD, I want also data flow, but I want only to see France and Belgium as countries. Not the other countries. I don't want to view them, but to see them in my new data flow. So I create a new data flow. And I link it to the same DSD as the other data flow. That's also DSD demo. So now my data flow is created, but it's the same as the other one. So I need to add constraints to it. Because I said I want only to see Belgium and France. and they may not see other countries also. Very important. So I create a constraint on that. And I said, okay, it's constrained on data flow level. And I need it on area. Okay, I select with data flow, sorry, and then select area. Next. And I said, I want to include values. Okay, and I need Belgium. And I also need France. Now my data flow is created. I go back to the data lifecycle manager and I will activate this data flow because it's not activated. And we go to the view. And you see we have only Belgium and France. And when you go to the filters, you cannot select another one. Although in the DSD are other countries, but we put a constraint on it. Now there's somebody else who said, okay, your data flow, the first original data flow, contains too much data. And you want a filter, default filter, when you arrive on this data flow. So what we'll do now, I will attach some annotations to the first data flow. Therefore, you have to know a little bit more about SDMX and annotation, but yeah, it's very easy to add them. And I want only to see rubric 1. And it's a default filter. So I add it, finish. You go to DLM. And I view data flow. And you see that only rubric 1 is shown. But you can also view the others by using the filter. And you can add also the other rubrics. It's not a constraint, it's just a filter. So that are a few examples on how we can use FMR Workbench, or we are using FMR Workbench. Presentation, sorry. No, starting over. So the conclusion is on FMR Workbench, you don't need a really SDMX experience. You don't have to be an SDMX expert. It's very user-friendly, and it's a self-explaining wizard, so it's very easy to follow. Less risk of mistakes, because when you use XML, you are changing something in XML, you import it, you can easily make mistakes. For us, it's separated from other administration actions. So we have the data owners can do modifications in the staging area. And we also created on different domain working groups. We created several agencies, and we give them access to their agency. So, and with the FMR Workbench, you can easily select your agency and you can work on it. So, and it's used for creation, maintenance of code list, labels, etc., and for visualization, because it's easy to maintain our data flows and constraints, filters, also layout. You can change your rows, columns, also in the FMR Workbench. So, thank you. Maybe a little more, we talk also about the FMR Workbench user group. So if there are people who are interested, you can also send an email to me, and I will give it to Frederick, who is responsible for the FMR Workbench. Thank you.
So, Jose, we have time for 2 questions. So, by show of hands, and I guess we need a microphone, please. So we have one here in the 3rd row at the end, and Matt over on the other side afterwards.
Hi, Thank you very much for the presentation. I just have one short question. Can I interact with this software through an API?
I don't think so. I don't. Technical.
Thank you.
Thanks. If you could pass the microphone over to Matt, because actually,
I'm only business analyst, no technical experience.
you left IT after 30 years. You really left IT.
IT department this long time ago.
Yeah, perhaps I can elaborate on the answer. So the user interface of FMR Workbench is all REST API driven. So when you see things like the code lists, that's actually a query from the UI via the REST web service to get the artifacts using the SDMX REST API. So it's a combination of the query plus your user session is kind of linked to a space. So when Jose was kind of changing the space, that changes it in the session. So the REST API responses change accordingly. And similarly with the post as well, so you can kind of post code lists and things to the API. And my comment, I guess question is, when you're showing the maintenance of code lists, you're showing the UI and you showed a little bit of Excel, but the Workbench also allows you to export a code list in Excel.
Yeah,
Do you use this workflow?
I used it, but it's not common used by the other data owners. They create their own Excel files and they just put it in. But I used it. You can export in Excel and you can change it and re-import.
And re-output with the Excel?
The same thing as you can do in DLM, but on DLM it's our XML files.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jose. If there's other questions, we'll have hopefully a little bit of time at the end of the session, and you can ask them then. Thank you.
Thank you.
So as in the first presentation, I referenced an IFC survey where we were doing a stock taking, and we presented the initial results of that in the global conference. Bianca and I will now present the final results from that survey. Again, I was introduced yesterday. Bianca, you haven't seen her yet, but I'm sure most of you know her very well. But Bianca joined the Bank of International Settlements in 2021 as a statistician. So let me get this up. Plug that in. Just plug it in. Thanks. Just trying to be time efficient here. Sorry. As a statistician following her career at the ECB, in DG Statistics. At the bank, she has contributed to defining and testing SDMX tools and has served as secretary of a cross-institutional group designing a global SDMX DSD for property prices indicators. So Bianca manages the end-to-end production workflow for several published BIS statistics and actively promotes the adoption of SDMX standards within the BIS. And here.
Thank you, Brian. You have the slides. Yes. Okay. Thanks, Brian. Good morning, everyone. As Brian said, today we will jointly present the results of a survey, of an IFC survey, which ran in 2023. I will introduce the survey for those of you who don't know about it. I guess some of you were maybe marginally involved or remember it from when the preliminary results were presented last year in Bahrain. And then I will move to explain the main results of SDMX adoption by statistical domain and data lifecycle, and then hand over to Brian. So just a very, very quick overview. The survey was aimed to assess the state of SDMX adoption and tools usage across central banks. It was answered by 52 IFC members, and it ran from March until August 2023. Very, very high-level result on SDMX adoption. From the survey, we see that 79% of the respondents were at the time using or implementing SDMX. What's also interesting is that we can compare the results to those of a similar survey which ran in 2016, also among IFC members. And back then, the SDMX adoption rate was 64%. And there is a further 13% of respondents who are evaluating to adopt SDMX, or actually planning to adopt it in the next years. So we can see that it's growing at a constant rate. It's not slowing down. Then, still staying on a very general level, we also tried to assess the blocking factors for those who are facing issues in adopting SDMX. There are, well, the two most mentioned blocking factors are the need to adapt internal tools to SDMX, and with no surprise, the lack of resources. But there's another blocking factor that's highlighted in this slide, and that is the lack of support in open source tools. And the reason for which we thought to highlight this blocking factor is that maybe this is a point on which the SDMX community, especially the developers of the open source tools, could focus in order probably to ease the initial burden of SDMX adoption and maybe overcome a little bit issues coming from the lack of resources. And now I will move on to the results by data lifecycle steps. So beyond just encouraging more central banks adopting SDMX, we also wanted to focus on those institutions that are using it, that think it's relevant, and they are maybe facing a different type of issue. So in this slide, you can see the perceived relevance of SDMX by our respondents by data lifecycle step. One thing that we can quickly see in the bar chart is that it's perceived as very relevant, especially for data reporting and for data production, less so for data collection. But what's actually important from this slide is we want to focus on those central banks that think it's extremely or very relevant. And we asked ourselves if their level of SDMX knowledge it's enough to support their use case. So if you follow me, now I'm just focusing on those central banks that said that SDMX is extremely relevant for a specific step of their data lifecycle process. And then to those central banks, we asked, what's your knowledge of SDMX? And what we can see from this slide is that there is a blue bar, which it's actually quite constant as a share for every step of the data lifecycle that indicates that there are respondents who think SDMX is extremely relevant and their knowledge is not very high. So they said, my knowledge is, I'm somewhat or slightly knowledgeable in SDMX. And this is the first gap that we found, is the relevance knowledge gap. But then there is we have some more insights on SDMX by statistical domain. The reason for which we also wanted to check SDMX adoption by statistical domain is that for central banks also one of the main focuses is exchanging data in some specific statistical domains with international organizations. And we also wanted to find out if there are some statistical domains where SDMX is more used, and if not, maybe why. This is maybe the most complex chart that we will have here. This is the breakdown of SDMX adoption by statistical domain and by data lifecycle step. You can see we identified the mainly produced statistical domains, also using the answers from the central banks. And what we can clearly see at a first glance is that for every statistical domain, reporting is the data lifecycle step for which SDMX is most used. This is not unexpected. And this is what we also call the demand-driven effect, because especially for some specific statistical domain, central banks have a mandate to report data in SDMX. But this is, these figures for reporting are not reflected for the other steps of the data lifecycle. So we have two faces of one coin. From one side, there are institutions that just report in SDMX. From other questions in the survey, it's clear that converters are used just in order to report, and SDMX is not used in any other step of the data lifecycle, which means that there are maybe advantages that are not fully achieved by the institutions that they could get if they adopted SDMX throughout the entire data lifecycle. But on the positive side, there is this demand-driven effect because institutions have to report in SDMX, and maybe this is just the first step that can encourage them to further adopting the standard throughout the other steps of the data lifecycle. So I have one last chart to show you before handing over to Brian, and these are the figures of SDMX adoption if we exclude reporting, if we just focus on those institutions that said, I'm using SDMX for at least another step of the data lifecycle. And what we can see is that, of course, the adoption rate is much lower, but it's quite constant across all the data domains, 30 to 45%. And we also see that there are significant plans to further adopt SDMX in the next years. And maybe possible conclusion, imputation for these figures is that for those data domains where there is a global DSD or somehow global artifacts can support partialing the modeling, it looks like the plans to adopt SDMX are higher in the future. And with this, you want Brian to go on the tools?
Thanks, Bianca. So categories of tools in use. We classified them in 3 groupings, in-house, open source, and commercial. And you can see on the bottom left chart that most organizations have some in-house tools, unsurprisingly. There's 25 open source tools in use and 13 commercial tools in use as part of their SDMX infrastructure. In the middle chart, you can see where the overlap is. It indicates all organizations that are using various types of tools, so not just open source or not just commercial. In fact, there is one central bank that has only commercial, but that's really an outlier. The majority of central banks are using multiple tools, and 7 banks using all 3. We did not assess the satisfaction with the in-house or commercial tools, but in looking at satisfaction of open source tools, we see that most central banks are either very satisfied or satisfied with the open source tools, with no dissatisfied responses whatsoever. So it's clear that a single monolithic end-to-end IT solution is not what SDMX is promoting, and it's not what's being implemented. So the standard advocates for a modular flexible approach, which necessitates an ecosystem, and that's the focus for SDMX.io as presented earlier, and I think you can see that the need for that based on just the way that SDMX tools usage is currently occurring within central banks. So the variety of tools illustrates one of the strengths of SDMX. It's a modular, loosely coupled design that encourages fit-for-purpose tools. And interoperability amongst these tools then is essential, and it's focusing on the interface between the tools to make sure that things can be plug and play together is really essential. And I think that that's the key messages for that slide. So usage of open source tools, what we're seeing is that there's 25 open source tools in use, but a vast majority of them are being used in 1 or 2 central banks only. So 2 of the main barriers to SDMX adoption is tools, other ones being resources or e-learning, knowledge upskilling. But in looking at the adoption rate of individual tools, it's not clear if there's actually an inefficient and fragmented marketplace in the open source tool space right now that we need to maybe consider additional consolidation and focusing around, I won't say cleaning it up, but having best of breed tools that are very purpose focused. So tools in the data lifecycle. The data lifecycle is fully covered by tools. Some tools cover most phases. There's a few tools that cover one phase, not really important one way or the other. The critical point being that the data lifecycle is fully covered by the open source tools, and they're being used in that way in the central banks. Successful adoption of SDMX tools also depends on the quality of the pre-implementation resources and guides, as well as post-implementation support. What we found from the feedback of the central banks is that Most of the central banks are very satisfied or neutral with both pre-implementation as well as post-implementation support and resources. There's room for improvement, but the tools community is already working in that space to continue improving and have established a number of KPIs that they're working to improve for these various areas. So I think it's not a great slide, it's not a bad slide, and there's work already underway to make this better. Key takeaways. So there's a notable and significant increase in SDMX adoption in central banks. As Bianca pointed out, it went from 64% to 79%, with still 13% additional considering or planning to adopt, so that gets us up to 92. That's significant. Most central banks are reporting using multiple tools and express satisfaction with the tools and resources. Main obstacles, both initial adoption and transitioning, are lack of resources as well as lack of adequate IT tools, either with their in-house tools or with the open source tools available. And 35 to 50% of the responding banks lack the requisite expertise. Like the knowledge gap across all data lifecycle processes was, okay, maybe extreme is extreme, but that's a pretty big gap that we saw for every one of those processes. So I think it's fantastic, the initiatives that the Asian Development Bank has undertaken to produce the e-learning courses, that the DataStat Academy has taken, e-learning courses that we've produced. I mean, we're all working towards making this better, but there's obviously a great demand and great need for that. And then, as Bianca already mentioned, the correlation between the global DSDs and rate of adoption. It'd be nice to understand that a little bit better and how much of that is, but what is clear is, as you said, it is driving adoption in further stages of the life cycle, which is fantastic. So it doesn't stop at reporting for most of the banks. It then further continues to leveraging SDMX in a strategic way for other processes. Anything else you'd like to add? Yeah, we're good. So, thank you very much. So we have time for 2 questions. And this is one of the reasons why I didn't take questions after SDMX IO, because it was kind of like putting the cart before the horse. As you can see, everything that was brought up in that presentation is being sort of, either it's a solution to some of the other items being raised, or the other presentations are solving some of the items flagged there. So anyway, so no questions?
Maybe just one comment. So there will be a report written which will summarize all the results. It's scheduled for November at the moment. So we will publish this on the IFC website. So IFC is the Irving Fisher Committee, which is basically a collection of 100 central banks who are exchanging on official statistics topics. And the IFC side is on the BS side. So I will also then distribute the report in the Secretariat, so just that you know. So just a comment.
Thanks, Raphael. I think there was another hand up. Okay, go ahead, Matt.
I think just another comment on the moving from monolithic to kind of individual units of work, if you like. This can be a challenge when take, for example, FMR, where it's storing metadata, and it doesn't know why it's storing the metadata, because if you remove kind of the data part and you put it over here and FMR is here, then of course it does its own validation to check, yeah, we're happy that that metadata is stored or deleted. But of course the data tier might say, well, you can't do that, because you've deleted something which is in use. And I think maybe semantic versioning goes some way to do this, but not everyone uses it. And I think for that purpose, that we may need to start considering kind of federating the validation step to say, right, we believe this is valid, and we're happy it's semantically valid, you don't break any referential integrity, but actually let's federate this out to other applications that may veto that change for whatever purpose. I think that would be quite a nice kind of step to to achieve this kind of goal.
Yeah, no, totally agree, makes perfect sense. Try to integrate the registry management side of it with the data management side of it, so that things stay in sync. Okay, thank you. So the next presenter is the next presenter, again, has been involved in SDMX since probably almost the beginning of SDMX, but so most of you know him very well. Stratos is a software engineer with significant experience in SDMX. He has contributed to the development of the SDMX standard and applies SDMX practices within the BIS. Stratos is also involved in promoting open source software collaboration, especially in SDMX. He's a member of the technical working group, as well as the SDMX Secretariat. And this is part one of two, I think, of a very exciting presentation, and I'm really looking forward to seeing it. So please start us over.
Thanks, Brian. So yeah, it's kind of a teaser for what's going to follow tomorrow, I guess, which is a bit more technical, but nevertheless, we'd like to introduce what we call in the TWG the SDMX Global Discovery Service. Now, this has been initiated by the technical working group and at the BIS in collaboration with Meaningful Data, our partners Antonio, Javier here, Alison also back in Salamanca working on that, have done quite a good job to implement this. And I'm always starting with a problem statement for SDDS because we want to highlight what's the reason of having just another global service. I mean, you all know the global registry, which serves a specific purpose, but the SDDS, yeah, the acronym is always cryptic, always one more acronym to remember. So the problem statement, discovery and sharing, I'm not going to read it all, you'll see it also tomorrow. And I think these are the buzzwords, discovery, sharing, and also trying to consolidate different registries, international, national, and to be fair, not only registries, but beyond to any SDMX services providing data or metadata on SDMX. Because I think that the biggest problem of SDMX so far was to discover what's out there, right? So you didn't know if an organization has something, or if an organization has something, where it is, and so on. So what we've gone so far. So the SGDS is a service built on a Django framework. It's just a web application, very simple one. It's currently containerized. It's deployed on an OKD cluster currently at the BIS, and requires a MariaDB database, but this is just one choice. Doesn't have to be, but anyway, this is supposed to be centrally deployed. It's not for anyone to deploy on their own. And we use PySDMX. You'll hear about it more in a minute. I think you probably heard about it also here and there in the presentation so far, which is an open source Python SDMX library that facilitates a lot of the SDMX related activities we need to do in the SDDS. It is currently deployed under this link, under SDMX.io, and that's the reason why we also present this in this context. But if you go there, you'll see the existing API, and this is what we will talk tomorrow about. Okay, so we won't elaborate on that anymore. There is also a draft UI, which I will show you today. And I'm saying draft because it's only deployed internally at the BIS, but will soon get out to the public to get also some feedback. And currently we have collected feedback on the first implementation, and we have already proceeded with the second implementation. So all the adaptations we have been required to be performed by the TWG. And just to give you an idea, it's rationalization of the messages. So again, we'll talk about this more, I think, tomorrow. And client-oriented requests, because it was mainly built around the information model, but now the API aims mostly to answer user questions. We'll talk about this. And I think one of the interesting features that has been requested for different reasons was the resolution of the URN. So if you have worked with SDMX, you've noticed that the URNs are pretty much everywhere. And it's kind of a unique identifier of an artifact. But still unique, but you don't know where this resides, right? You have a URN, but it's CLFREG, but you don't know where to find it. So this is, with the information we have on the SCTS, the objective is to give you the exact location. So a couple of words about the browser. It's a very simple UI that you can browse available agencies, and then you can see where they publish their artifacts. And of course, we just have a few of them now, just around the TWG. We have collected information, so this is up-to-date information, it's not dummy information. And as soon as the UI is available, you can also browse it. Let me just quickly show you. Now, okay, here it is. Yeah, that's. So, as I said, it's relatively simple interface, and the first page really explains what is SCTS, the principles, so why we build the SCTS and why it's useful. But I think that the key is the agencies. As you can see here, there is a list of agencies available. Of course, as we said, it's only a few of them. So you can go to this page. In the, let's say, in the future, we anticipate to have more agencies here, so you would need to search for them. No need to do that for 7 agencies now. And then we can have a quick look of what is there, what's the information there. So first of all, you have the locations, which means where the artifacts of a specific agency are published, right? So in the case of SDMX, as an agency ID, is the global registry. But you can also see something that might not be so relevant to the user, but it's mostly relevant to how the information is structured, which is the endpoint. So it's the implementation of the, let's say, service, which is the global registry in this case, belongs to SDMX. But this does not mean that only has information about SDMX. So if I go, for example, to the IMF, you'll see that they have their own endpoint, right? The IMF services, but they, as a location of publishing information, they also use the global registry. So that's the differentiation between location and endpoint, just a very high-level explanation. And that would be all for now, for the UI, and there's nothing more to detail for the moment. And let me get my control back. Okay. So next steps, where we want to go. We want to expose the new API to potential users, and this means the clients here, users, are not so much the end users, but other systems that might profit from this information. And one very simple example is what you already saw already by Jose, the FMR Workbench. The FMR Workbench could be using the information there to fetch metadata from services around the globe, right? Because it's based on a web service interface, so it could simply get information there and discover what's out there. Of course, we expose this UI that you've seen under the SDMX.io also for users to be able to have an idea of what's out there. And then we have a bit of administrative job to do, so to set up the onboarding process, because you understand that any agency would like to register there, but there has to be, I mean, there are already rules if you want to register an agency in the global registry, but on top we also need to have a process to onboard the services. So we have some ideas there, like the next bullet, and also something that you will see, I think, today, the TCK, which is the test compatibility kit. So the idea is if you register a new service, then we would have to run the TCK, and this will give you a report of what are the capabilities of the service. Because apart from having an endpoint, it's also useful to know what message formats are supported, what of the resources are supported. It doesn't mean that you implement an SDMX API and you have everything. Maybe you have only TSDs and code lists. So this is information that the SGTS will provide. So that's all for today. More about this tomorrow on the API presentation, and hopefully it will be a bit more exciting. Thank you.
Thanks, Stratos. Luca, can we do the Slido now? Just changing gears a little bit. So, we're going to do a Slido for this one. There was a Slido for the survey as well, but we'll do that at the end of the session. And then we'll take questions after the Slido poll. So start thinking about questions if you have any.
Mannaggia.
Should be relatively simple to answer and easy. It's just to get a grasp of what you understand or what you expect from the SGTS. So, I suppose that this would be anticipated to be answered only from those that are in the TWG saying that they are familiar. For the rest, I guess it's relatively new. I'll give you some time because it's the entry point is always a bit has an overhead. I think we can use the statistics to see how many of the participants are in the TWG currently, right? Yeah, I mean, it's also collecting a bit information about what we're talking tomorrow, so to understand a bit the sentiment of.
So I'll let you choose when to end this and give your summary,
Stratos.
Stratos.
The
But
next one, I
yeah.
think.
Okay.
I've already 55 answers. So, and this is, of course, about how you currently do your job, and if we think that, so this will give us an idea of, yeah, we go on with SGTS or we dump it just before tomorrow even. I thought it's going to be easy. I think we are 47. Okay, I think we'll continue with tomorrow's presentation. Okay, sounds good.
I'm surprised so many people find it easy, but that's good.
Maybe someone is already using the SGTS, I'm not sure. And then, of course, this is a bit premature because you haven't seen a lot about the API, but yeah, just as an idea of what you think the SGTS is, what is your perception, what would be best suited for you. Yeah. I was hoping the API would be more popular, but okay. If you give to people, they take. No, that's great. Yeah,
If you give people the option of both, they choose both. So it's good, though. Excellent. Thanks, Stratos. Thanks, Luca. So we'll have time for some questions at the end. So if you have more questions for Stratos about the SGTS, but you could also hold off until the presentation tomorrow when you'll have the complete picture, just to say. So the next presenters, we mentioned the PySDMX earlier this morning, and it's been mentioned a few times. So we have Javier and Xavier presenting. Javier's been lead software developer of STMX services and meaningful data. He develops tools based on the STMX standard and the validation and transformation language, or VTL. And STMX maintains the STMX Thon library based on Python and data science libraries like Pandas and NumPy. And VTL, he has been a member of the VTL task force and maintains the VTL engine, part of the VTL suite, which has recently gone open source. Huh? And Xavier has been working with STMX since 2005. He has represented two sponsors, both the BIS and the ECB, obviously at different times, in the STMX TWG, and has led the work on the STMX REST API since its inception. So if you like the STMX REST API, this is the guy to thank. If you don't, the complaint box is in the back. Yes. But at the moment, Xavier architects and implements distributed systems powered by STMX. And we're going to hear more about that. If you are participating in the capacity building on Friday, you're going to hear about it then, because he's presenting on the METAL initiative at the BIS. And if you're not planning on participating, we encourage you to participate, because you can either do it here on site or remotely. If you've already have left Thursday afternoon, you can connect back up with us again on Friday morning from your home or office. Please, guys, over to you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to introduce you to a library written in Python and for STMX. So basically, this slide will show you in 3 points what you need to remember, if anything, from this presentation. So the thing is, at the BIS, as you know, we have also the FMR, so as STMX registry, and because we use it extensively for basically the entire life cycle, and we have all our metadata in the registry, we needed a way to get to these metadata from our Python applications. And different Python applications and components, they are all metadata driven, and all these metadata are in the FMR. So that was basically how PySTMX was born. It was to bring all the wealth of information we have in the registry so that we can use it to power our different systems and processes. And it's part of the project Linkage X. Brian, you said everything about this, I think, and I'm grateful we can be here, and you have it hosted there. So it's part of BIS Open Tech. So in a nutshell, this is it. That's a summary slide. Now, if we go into a bit more detail about what it can do for you today, because it's under heavy development. We have not reached version 1.0 yet. We are about to do this. But we have let's say, an ambitious roadmap. But what it can do now is basically, the first point maybe sound a bit abstract. Maybe it's more talking to developers about this domain-driven design or domain-driven development. But if you have different components, different services interacting with each other, they need a kind of language they can all understand. I mean, what is a data set? What is a data flow? What is a code list? And this is what we have in Python. So we have an information model based on the STMX information model, obviously, but written as a set of Python class, and that you can then use as interfaces between your processes. Then, second core thing that I was mentioning before, it was used to retrieve STMX metadata from STMX registries, and that was what it was, let's say, doing initially, but since then it does much more than this. And this is thanks to BIS joining forces with meaningful data.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the next thing that I can do today also, we integrated also the STMX library in order to provide a simple data interface for the STMX data, and for example, to ensure that we can be compatible with many other formats. Let's say that if you would like to store your data inside the database, if you would like to store your data inside a Parquet format, some specific formats that are being used by big data and data scientists in order to ensure that you can handle efficiently STMX data, you can provide it with the PySTMX library. You will be able to read STMX data in several formats, STMX CSV, STMX JSON, STMX ML also. That's why we integrated also the STMX library. And also you will be able to write from a pandas data frame into an SDMXML, SDMXJSON, or SDMCSV format. As Xavier before stated, the version 1.0 will be released soon. We'll plan to make a release candidate as before this month for sure, and later on the version 1.0 will be released before the calendar year in order to be also presented in a webinar with the BIS shortly enough, once we decide on a particular date to make it. Finally, we would like to announce that we'll be implementing SDMX 3.0. We have it already implemented in several formats related with SDMXJSON and SDMXCSV. We will attempt to implement it also on SDMXML. This will be a huge milestone for us in order to be at the vanguard of the technology and the standards, state of the art, and we'll try also to ensure that it will be compatible with many of the SDMX APIs and the connectors that we are building for the data producers in order and the data consumers to be able to access, retrieve the data, format it in whatever they would like, and finally to get the use cases done from the site in a simple way. Yeah.
Thanks, Javier. And regarding the 3.0, as you were mentioning, on the data formats, we still have some work.
Mm-hmm.
But for example, SDMX being a new library, it's already based on the 3.0 information model. So if you need something like, I don't know, multiple measures, array components, and all these kind of things, you are already covered with the current implementation. On the API side as well, the API supported. Basically, we support all versions of the API since 1.0, back to 2011, up until the latest one. So this is already covered. So this is what it can do, and then what we thought would be interesting to show you is how we use this in our respective organization. So starting with how we use it at the BIS, as I was mentioning, on our side, we do SDMX for the full life cycle. Everything is metadata driven, and everything is in the FMR. So basically, this is how we use PySDMX. And to give you a few examples, for example, we have a new project that is in our unit, which is the Monetary and Economic Department. We have a new data lakehouse project that we are building. And for example, the generation of the file systems layout is done using metadata stored from the registry. So for example, there we have a category scheme with the data sets that are onboarded on this data lakehouse. These data sets, so data flows, they have an agency. And this is used, we have also the providers information. So for example, for Dataflow XYZ, we have, I don't know, 40 providers. And this is used to generate the file system. So the different folders where the data will be stored, and also to assign the permissions. Because if you think about it, in an agency, so the owner of the data flow, you can add contact information. This contact could be the approver of groups you would have, I don't know, in Active Directory. So everything there is really driven by the metadata we have in the FMR. There is no hard coding anywhere. Another example is the physical data model. This is, of course, the classical example. You need to store your data somewhere. Let's say it could be, I don't know, Hive, Metastore, or it could be SQL Server. But you still need to define, basically, the structure of the table. So the different columns or components in SDMX, their types. And this is then obviously coming from DSD information, among others, or concept schemes. And so this is also used on our side to create the tables for the storage. Data validation, obviously, so not only against the DSD, but also against the data flow and every constraint you have. So we have a lot of metadata in the SDMX information model that can be used to validate input, and we make use of that. Another one, I think in SDMX, if you need to map data, but here by mapping, I should add, I'm talking about structural mapping. So not the kind of transformation we have in the VTL, which is also a beast on its own, but already only for the structural mapping, we can do a lot. We can do a lot with SDMX. You can map components to components, many to many. You can have, I don't know, regular expression with capture groups. You can map dates, times, whatever you want. I mean, if you go to the structural mapping part of SDMX, it's really rich. And we can leverage all that, and we do, in our mapping steps when we ingest data. And the other one is maybe also a more exotic use case, but if you have metadata-driven steps, maybe you need to configure them. Maybe for a business unit, if something is wrong in a submission, the entire submission needs to be quarantined. But for another unit, they are happy to proceed with the subset of valid data and only quarantine what was wrong. So that can depend on the unit. So how do you pass this configuration information to validation step or mapping step? We do that using reference metadata, and so they are also there. So this is how we use that. And then we have the data connectors that are coming soon. This is something we are quite happy to work on as well, because you have many different APIs and sources, but how do you get to their data? And you can have the REST API, but it's quite rich, it's quite complex. So we have a connectors API that is made of 5 functions, allowing you to discover and retrieve data. And you don't know where they are stored if you go via an API. If you go directly to a database, you have this simple API to go to the data. And this is what we are developing at the moment.
Regarding the role of PySDMX for meaningful data, we have inherited the main roles that the former SDMX library were using. First of all, we developed a project for the SDMX Global Conference in Bahrain in order to make it an SDMX BI, business intelligence tool, in order to visualize data and to make it easier for the user. Also to be integrated in several data visualization platforms if anyone does need it. So I will show it to you in a simple way. This is a screenshot of this BI data. As you can see, you may find all the data aggregated from the SDMX that is downloaded for the GDP in Spain, and specifically from my city, on Salamanca. And regarding the data, it has been pulled from the SDMX API and seamlessly integrated into this tool and make it into visualization. So you will be able to generate any kind of graph, any kind of map. You will be able to add any format that you may like, as it is based on Apache Superset, which is an open source platform, and also, of course, to make plugins for it if you need it on a custom way. We will also make, even if it is an open source project, we may be able to support you in order to integrate it into your system. Some of you have been interested from the time that we presented this in Bahrain and show it to you personally, to now that we have been presenting it in several conferences, we've seen that it is getting more attention, so we'll be happy to help you if you would like to integrate it and to have a look at it in a deep way. And also, of course, the use of data, metadata in the VTL suite. Originally, this project was conceived as a way to add more formats that we may use in the VTL environment, in our commercial product, the VTL suite. And the current role for the PySDMX library will be to download the data that we download and format the data that we get into the platform in order to perform VTL transformations and validations, and of course make the mapping between the data structure definitions to the VTL artifacts that we are currently supporting in our commercial product. So the thing will be to use any kind of data set that you may think of, apply several validations, several transformations, or use it, for example, to try and generate a data pipeline inside it using the SDMX format and the VTL language, so to fit all of your use cases. It may be used for data dissemination, it may be used also for data validation, as I'm saying, also data transformation inside the pipeline.
Okay, so now you've seen basically what the library does, and this slide is about what we are working on or we will start to work on soon. And one was related to this connectors API I was mentioning, and this is to better support data discovery and data retrieval from SDMX services. So we have already query builders for any version of the REST API since its inception until the most recent ones that could be used to query services. And this, of course, we are really looking forward to the API on the SGDS side, because this is what we would like to leverage in the end, right? Going to the SGDS to facilitate data discovery and data retrieval. Then for, let's say, data readers, data writers, we need to support more STMX formats. I mean, we have the usual suspects, obviously, but there are others that we would like also to add support for. And then at the moment, I think it's fair to say the focus was primarily on reading a data file and transforming it into a Pandas data frame, which is the perfect use case for data analysis. But we use it also on our side on the BIS more as part of our ingestion pipeline. And this is running on Kubernetes. And you don't know how much memory you have. And for example, if you read something in Pandas, everything goes into memory. But we get also some fairly large files, and they wouldn't fit into memory. But also sometimes in Kubernetes, you can say, okay, I want my pod to run with 1 gigabyte of data and up to 8, 1 gigabyte of RAM and up to 8. But you are not guaranteed to have these 8, so maybe even a medium-sized thing wouldn't fit. And so we need to support this kind of more streaming, low-memory scenario. This is also something we need to work on. And then on the data processing side, I was telling you that we are using PySDMX to get the metadata from the registry and then power functions like validate, map, summarize, or format conversion. We have, of course, these functions internally. They are written in Python as well. So they could be a good candidate for being added to the library as well later on. We are less sure about this. It depends a bit on the appetite also of the community. Because these functions at the moment, they are very kind of opinionated. So like everything is treated as a data frame. We have some concepts that are not yet in SDMX. We think they would be useful, like a unique key to identify any type of artifact. But at the moment, the current state is that it's SDMX, but it's let's say, an opinionated version of it. So yeah, that's one thing under consideration. But basically, this is what we have on the roadmap for later. And I think that was the last slide, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, guys. That's fantastic. We have time for a couple of questions. We have our Canadian central banker at the front here.
Thank you. Okay, guys. Thank you for the presentation. This actually looks very great and very promising. I think you mentioned something about writing from a Pandas data frame to SDMX. That interests me a lot. And I don't know how far you guys are with that, but one of the other interesting feature for that would be like a flexibility to include, like when you upload that data frame, ask for it to be validated and like maybe have an option of produce an SDMX or don't produce it depending on what the validation results are. So I just wanted to comment on that.
Yes, and as we were integrating also the SDMX library, it already had a function in order to read SDMX data to a Pandas data frame and then write from Pandas data frame to SDMX formats again. And we also included the validation of the inside the Pandas data frame in order to check for structural validation. Let's say that you have, for example, a specific code list, and you have a specific column or a specific dimension or a specific attribute bound to that code list. And in order to validate that the values that are inside that column are aligned with the code list that you have defined for it. So we make only a structural validation. And we made also a set of rules in order to check for duplicates, for example, and these kind of things inside the Pandas data frame, related also with a combination, for example, of all dimensions to be unique, something like that. And yeah, so we are supporting it right now on PySDMX also from the reading and the writing in all SDMX formats. We still plan to make SDMX ML 3.0 soon. But we currently support SDMX CSV 1.0 and 2.0, SDMX JSON, I believe 1.0 and 2.0, I believe. Yeah. and also SDMXML 2.1, which is the most widely used still format in all central organizations. So I believe for your use cases, you will be able to use PySDMX in its full.
Great, thanks.
the
It
question?
was Jonathan against the wall at the back.
Thank you for this. I know we'll talk more about this on Friday, and I'm just wondering, have you thought about introducing maybe some AI in here? Because, of course, this is still relatively technical and requires someone with a bit of knowledge there. But have you thought about this maybe in a future version to introduce this to sort of make it lower code and more sort of targeting maybe a less data engineer type profile? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question. So at the moment, it's not in scope. In scope are the things that I were mentioning, because we kind of need them yesterday rather than today. So this is our focus. But Rafael, so we were expected to have discussions about the roadmap, what we are doing next, and I think then this point could be of course considered. Yeah. Thank you.
If I may complement also. If I may complement, Jonathan, on AI, I believe that, for example, it could be a useful tool to be integrated using an AI pipeline. Most AI pipelines are based normally on Python libraries. So as you are using also Python, then integrating, for example, PySDMX into that pipeline to be easier to convert, for example, XML data into better manageable data like CSV formats and something like this, then it could be used. And also, for example, in order to retrieve information, metadata information from the several web services and SDMX APIs that you may find, then you could also use PySDMX for that purpose.
Yeah, maybe just to complement, Jonathan, we have a bigger AI-related code, let's say, bot project, where we basically train an LLM with all the custom functions which we develop, which are not just the PySDMX ones, but also other lab functions, connector functions. We also feed all the documentation which we have into the model. And the idea is that a little bit like GitHub Copilot, if you start to implement, especially if our statisticians who are not so familiar with all the, let's say, utility functions which you develop, if they start to code develop, they get proposals. And the proposals are ranked higher if they are internal, let's say, custom functions, for example. Also, they get proposals where to find documentation. So this is at the moment on the pipeline. Initially, we started with GitHub Copilot, but you might be familiar with GitHub Copilot. It's very hard to configure. Or actually, it's not possible to configure at the moment. So we actually started a parallel internal LLM, which we actually train on our model together with GitHub Copilot. Now, what I understand on the GitHub Copilot roadmap, you will also in the future be able to also train this model to some extent. So, but that will definitely come. So I fully agree with you. I think this is a big opportunity to make this much more accessible to non-experts. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Rafael. And I think we'll have more time for questions at the end. Sorry, Abdullah, just to keep things moving, because Luca was quite insistent at the kickoff this morning to stay on time. So,
okay.
So thanks a lot, guys. So our last presentation of the session is TCK status and roadmap. So Nadia has joined Eurostat in 2010 after working for 6 years in the National Statistical Institute of Bulgaria. She currently has the role of Deputy Head of Unit for IT in statistical production and managing the development of SDMX software. Example, SDMX RI, SDMX Source, and Metadata Registry. Nadia is a member of the SDMX TWG and manages the development of the SDMX TCK. Over to you.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning also from me. Tough role of having the last presentation from the session and kind of dividing it between you, small pool, and a coffee break. However, bear with me for a couple of minutes, and I hope that what you'll see will be very interesting. Before I start, I have a question, and please be honest. How many of you, being either a developer, managing development teams, managing projects, or being an architect in your organization, when you are picking a tool, you are wondering how compliant this tool is with SDMX? Look no more, TCK is here to answer your question. So it's, especially if it moves, it's going to answer the question.
Should be the green button.
Okay, wrong remote. Good, good start now. Okay, yeah. Okay, so what we'll see today is how actually TCK is answering this question. What the tool is all about, how the architecture is of structure of the tool, what are the releases, and what's coming next. So, yes. As mentioned by Stratos previously, the Test Compatibility Kit is an application allowing you, either as a developer or architect, or just looking for implementation of SDMX existing tools to understand if this tool corresponds to your requirements. What it does is actually to measure the coverage and compliance of your implementation based on the REST web service specifications under SDMX and the different versions of the REST API. How it does that is basically by executing queries towards an endpoint, a web service endpoint, and measuring what is the coverage and compliance of this endpoint. What is the difference? Well, obviously, maybe your implementation doesn't cover the whole information model and all type of queries out there, but you could return, for example, correct error code, and still your implementation to be compliant with the specifications. It uses all type of queries that the REST specifications allow by dividing these queries in the 4 resources and the 4 indices that are prescribed with specifications, mainly data structure, referential metadata, and schema. The tests are organized in a hierarchical way in order to use some inputs from the parent tests which are needed for the child tests to be executed. For example, when you do detail or reference parameter tests, you need some input from the parent tests. And as well as that, all the tests are built in a dynamical way, which we'll see just right now. So a bit more on the tool. It's an open source tool. It's written in JavaScript and it runs on Node.js. And for the front end, the framework that is used is React on the local storage that is used to temporarily store the test definitions, the results, and so on. It uses Redux. It's also available as a Docker image and published in GitHub that we'll talk a bit later on about. How actually it works in practice is composed of several significant components, starting from the first one, which is called the TCK client, which is actually responsible for intercepting user parameters that are needed for the running of the TCK. Those parameters are the web service endpoint, the type of the version of the REST API that you want to test your implementation with, the type of the queries that you want to run, and so on. It also uses the TCK client in order to initialize a local storage where the definition of the test will be stored and the results. This input is given to the manager, and the TCK client requests from the manager to prepare and execute the tests. What is the role of the manager? Well, based on the name, it manages the whole workflow and actually instructs the other modules to work for him. What it does in practice is based on the information received. It requests from another significant component, which is called TCK reporter, to prepare all the tests and execute them. Also uses the requester module in order to validate the HTTP codes that are returned from the web service. And these results are sequentially passed through different audio modules that are part of the TCK architecture. Starting from the parser, which, based on the SDMX information model provided by the TCK API, parses the message and translates this message into an internal representation, which is based on JSON. And in case the returned response from the execution of the query is in XML format, it validates this response against the XSDs. This internal message is parsed sequentially to two other significant components, basically the semantic checker, which is like the core of the TCK, which validates the returned message syntactically and semantically. And the second type of validation that is performed is by the HTTP validator, which executes additional checks on the HTTP codes returned, and as well as that, validates the accept header responses, and so on. All this information, the results of all these components' work, is returned to the manager, which marks all the tests either with compliant or non-compliant, with covered or not covered, and passes this information back to the TCK client. What the TCK client does in this case is it calculates what actually is the score from all these tests based on the responses that are returned, and represents these responses as a percentage of all the tests that were executed. So it returns back a percentage value. And in case the end user would like to obtain these results not in a GUI, but in any kind of file format, the TCK supports 3 different reports currently, which are structured either in XML, JSON, or Excel. Now, although you will see not very flashy graphical user interface, so you can't compare it with what we just saw, the SDMX Insight, I hope that the TCK has quite a lot of strength on the functionality level. So how it works for end users and not as developers that want to invoke the tool while testing their implementation is the user is prompted to provide all the necessary input details. Again, the web service URL that you want to test, the version of the API that you want to test the implementation against, and the type of queries that you want to execute. So you can decide to execute a single type of query or all of them altogether. Based on this selection, the TCK starts running, obviously, and represents the result by computing also scores of compliance and coverage. It's just for test purposes. Don't think that the values are correct as of today. As you can see, also, it executes massive amount of queries based on the selection of the user. However, all these queries are executed sequentially. So there is no threat of, let's say, overloading a web service. And you can, as mentioned previously, decide if you want to download the results and examine them further by selecting one of the supported formats. You can download the report, and you can also examine further in case of non-compliance or non-coverage, what is the reason for that. So there is error description why the test was marked either as not covered or non-compliant. A bit on the releases. In the course of last year, first official release of the SDMX TCK has been issued, supporting SDMX 2.1 and up to 1.4 version of the REST API. The work didn't stop, obviously, there. SDMX continues evolving, and version 3.0 has been published, and the REST 2.0 as well, to support this new version of the standard. So in the meantime, we have worked on increasing the coverage, I would say, of the TCK when it comes to different versions of the API, and as well as that, starting tackling 3.0 features and the newer version of the REST API. So from the test releases that are also available in GitHub, 2 major ones, I would say, that require your attention or quite useful for 3.0 implementers is version 4.4, which supports the structure queries on the REST 2.0 API. It's available for test. and as well as that version 4.7, which supports the major tests on the data queries. Now you see in the small table that some type of queries, for example, the schema and the referential metadata, either partially supported or not supported at all. We'll have a small pool on that to decide, to see what is your appetite of support for these queries. Now, what is in the pipeline? Well, the ambition is obviously to catch on the different versions of the API, and as well as that there is a new one already available. It's 2.1. And the ambition is this case to be quicker, I would say, supporting these newer releases of the REST API. So some corner cases when it comes to previous versions are not yet supported, and as well as that, the representation or the format of the messages when it comes to parsing the results currently is only based on XML. However, we're working on supporting JSON as well, because JSON is the default format in any case of retrieving data using REST 2.0 and SDMX 3.0 respectively. So by Q1 next year, the ambition is to cover everything when it comes to structure queries and different versions of the available REST API, and as well as that to increase the support for the data queries. Now, if you want to learn more, you're more than welcome to visit GitHub, to visit sdmx.org and sdmx.io as presented by Brian, learn more about the tool, see what is in the development pipeline. We're more than welcoming any contributions or ideas for the development, and as well as that, because the time doesn't allow it obviously today, but if you are interested in the tool, there is a small link that you can follow and still within the presentation find more details about the architecture and the role of each model, and more details, I would say, on each of them. So with this, I hope I'm within the time frame. And thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Nadia. And we have a Slido poll, and then we'll take a couple of questions. When we're doing the question part, if the other presenters could make their way to the front, because then we have enough time for just having everybody up here for open questions at the end. We should have about 10 minutes. But first, the Slido poll. I'll leave it to you, Nadia, when you want to do summary comments or move on to the next. I think we're getting about 50 responses to the previous poll, so we're getting close.
We see the answers going towards increasing the SDMX portfolio, which is great.
Okay. We switch.
Yeah,
I mean, it's more or less stable.
Yeah.
We switch? Okay. Then next question.
pretty afraid that was going to be the answer.
Just so you know, this is a typical question from Nadia because she didn't allow the multiple choice. And whenever it's the same problem I always have, that whenever she asks us what is your priority, she only wants one. She doesn't accept that I tell her everything.
Not the results, please. Come on, scan it. No luck today. No luck.
Great actionable input from this.
I didn't vote.
So I hope this helps you.
You can break the deadlock then. You get to decide as the final vote what to do. Okay, I think that's it, right?
Yes, we have time for a couple questions for this session, and then we'll have an open Q&A after. Any questions?
Yes.
Okay, if all of the presenters want to come up and grab a seat at the front, then we'll just have an open Q&A. Okay, Luca, start this off, and then in the back after. Just take this, Luca.
So I have a question related to interoperability. I was wondering if in the survey that you made, there were, at some point in the slide you had a bubble that said interoperability is very important. But I wonder if there were any complaints or specific questions about interoperability, about people complaining that maybe I'm using this tool and it doesn't support the specific format that this other tool requires, or that someone is asking of me, which is also related a bit to the TCK, right? Which is supposed to ensure that things are interoperable according to the standard. So I was wondering if there were any specific comments or complaints coming about interoperability and that being somewhat an obstacle or a constraint in the choice of tools. Especially with the advent of 3.0, this could be, which has varying support in different tools. I wonder if this could be an issue to be explored maybe then in the next round of the survey. And then also about the survey, were there any questions that were really specific to the central banks? I'm thinking, can I just take the survey and maybe run it with my, for the fiscal offices in the EU, for example? Or was the survey somewhat, had elements that were specific to central banks that would need to be adapted? That's it.
Okay. Thanks. I'll take the first part, you take the second part? Okay. Regarding the tools, we wanted to be careful about how much we drew as conclusions from an individual tool perspective, because if you remember the slide which said how many banks are actually using any specific tool, the numbers were so low that any conclusion would have been really skewed. One person using it and giving their comments is not really something you want to use to drive strategy or change direction or anything. But there were comments, and which is why at the aggregate level we did comment and flag the fact that interoperability is important and has been a problem in some cases, yeah. But no specific tools should be mentioned in that, just again because of.
And maybe also for interoperability, there were just a couple of very specific questions on XBRL, and it was mentioned that it's still in parallel to SDMX, very widely used standard. For the reusability of the questionnaire, I would say it's reusable. It's available on request, and most of the questions are absolutely not they can be reused even beyond the central bank. Maybe some at the very beginning, the institutional ones, we can take them out, and it would actually be very interesting to repeat them to a different audience and to see if there is a pattern also in the caused by the institution type, I would say. So.
And the data domains would have to change, because it was very specific to central bank data domains. Otherwise, I think we're fine.
Yeah, actually, I mean, that was just a remark in general. I think that's always been a bit of an issue that we have a kind of a classification of data domains, which we kind of use, which is this classification of statistical activities, but it's not very widely used. And that makes sometimes, since we always use our own definitions of data domains, it makes the comparability a bit difficult between different surveys. And also for the use cases, I was thinking that, you know, if I gave those 5 use cases, I would have half the people confused about maybe the difference between reporting and dissemination. And I mean, that's something that could be highlighted in the implementation task force of David, or the business case task force by Abdullah, to have kind of a classification of use cases with a clear definition that people can refer to you know, what is the use case about.
Yeah, good points. Could you pass to the guy in the back in the blue sweater? I think third last row, right in the center. Or maybe it's a blue shirt, but anyway. Right. Keep going back. On your right side. There we go. Well, now you turned around. There we go. Okay. And Abdullah, we'll take your question after this. Sorry, just to get back to you. Go ahead, Yuri.
Sorry for jumping in. I have a question for Javier and Xavier. We are developing similar Python packages for very custom and minimal use cases, but I see that one of our tools, the mapping tool, is like probably 95% overlapping with PySDMX. I was wondering, how are you governing the PySDMX roadmap? How could we squeeze in the remaining 5% of our needs and quirks in our packages to probably have a better maintenance looking forward?
Thanks. Is that something you want to take, Rafael?
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly the use case for SDMX.io, Yuri. Yeah? So the idea would be, we had exactly the same situation with Meaningful Data, that we had some internal Python libraries. Meaningful Data had the SDMX ton, and we basically we were sitting together and said, okay, let's join forces, let's not duplicate. What I would say we do as a next step, once we release 1.0, or maybe even already before, that you join and we basically discuss what's the overlap and how can we actually merge these projects then in a 1.1 or 2.0 release. Yeah, but the idea of SDMX.io is exactly, let's not duplicate all the work, let's join together and then collaborate collectively on the code base. It would be in GitHub, available to everybody, so an open source project. Thanks. And if anybody else has another Python library, so please step forward. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's Abdullah next, and then.
Yeah, thank you. My question is also for Xavier and Javier. I've tried to use Panda SDMX, and my frustration was that you couldn't use it to manipulate structural metadata. That was my use case. You could do that in theory. In practice, it was full of bugs, some of which I managed to resolve. So the question is straightforward. Can you use PySDMX to manipulate structural metadata, such as create code lists, create data structures, and so on? Thanks.
Well, first of all, I would like to, just out of curiosity, if anyone knows the owner of Pandas SDMX, this guy, Dr. Leto, because I've been trying to locate him for several years now in order to exchange some use cases and possible overlappings on the SDMX library formerly and now by SDMX. If anyone knows him, please hand me his contact because I would like to be interested in talking with him. Okay. And secondly, of course, answering to your question, yeah, we will be able to manage all metadata related to SDMX 3.0 version. There will be a detailed list of what we will cover and what we will not cover once we release the version 1.0. And if we find that the organization has an appetite for including a specific functionality related to structural metadata then we'll be able to fit it in the roadmap if we find enough appetite for it. And regarding the current implementation, yeah, I believe that we will cover most of the use cases with what is currently implemented.
Maybe if I may add just one tiny detail. On the metadata retrieval side, you can already retrieve any types of artifacts. And then once you have these objects in Python, you can, of course, also modify them. The functionality that is missing at the moment would then be to post your modifications back to the registry. Excuse me?
Can you save it as a file?
As a file, yes, definitely. Yeah. But posting it back at the moment, the part that we still need to work on is on the authentication side. Because, okay, of course, it's not like a read operation where you don't need to authenticate. Yeah.
So another question regarding to PySDMX. So currently in our OPA data portal that we shared with countries, we have the functionality like to click API and you can generate, let's say, the script that you use, like in Python, in R, in SAS, to connect and use. So now, since we are working on the new upgraded version of our portal, and as I say, here we are interested in this kind of library, and you mentioned that you are working in connectors. So I want to ask, in addition to FMR API, can we use for NSI Web Service developed by Eurostat, version 8, for example? If yes, how it is possible to manage the integration in another software? So if you have some upgraded, etc. So what is the best approach to be sure that tomorrow, after we integrate, there is no issue in terms of compatibility in version, etc.? Thank you.
No, thanks. Great question. So at the moment, what we have in PySDMX, there is a module in there. I think it's called QB for Query Builder, or API QB, something like that. And basically what it offers you a way to express a query for data, schema, structures, reference metadata in a kind of neutral way. And then we can translate that query into the REST URL that you would need to execute it against an endpoint. And that will take into consideration the version of that endpoint. So you can say, I need the URL for version 1.5 or for version 2.0. So this is what we have at the moment. What is missing, and this is what we want to work on, is the integration with SGDS. When we can then get the list of services, the version they supply, and their capabilities. Like, for example, they support data queries and schema queries, but that's it. And then I think it would, if I understood your use case correctly, at the moment what you would get is a URL that you can already use. Later, what you would be able to do as well then is to simply use a connector to execute that query and get the response for you. This last part is still missing, but it's coming soon. Yeah.
So time for one more question. The gentleman here in the blue tie, and then we're going to have time for the break after that. So everybody that has questions in their mind, I'm sure everybody's available during the breaks to be bombarded with them. So thanks, please.
Question to Stratus and maybe not yourself. It's like about, because I was thinking about whether, have you thought about providing a compatibility information along the registered services that are in the Discovery service, and whether it would be possible, whether in UI part or in an API better, I think, and maybe to combine, the TCK functionality to do the automated tests from time to time, and also to provide the last check, compatibility check along the service.
Thank you. Yes, I think that this was the whole idea from the beginning. So the information would include message formats, supported resources. So pretty much what Xavier was explaining about what PySDMX needs, for example, and what another client would need. And I think it was my last bullet, that the TCK is the next thing we need to integrate. And we will have to have a process to frequently, let's say, find out, maybe, I don't know if it's frequently or if it's on the user demand, assess what is the status of the web service. But you will see a bit more, I think, tomorrow. Today, in the simple UI, you already saw, maybe not very much detail, that there is an endpoint, but also you have two columns, which is data sources, messages, and formats. So you have all the information you need there. Okay.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for all the great questions and for your rapt attention all morning. Appreciate everybody's, I'm not sure if you're getting up early or not, but making it out for some time. And that's it for the session. Please give one final round of applause for all of our presenters. And again, everybody's available during the break. Thank you.
Please go back at 11:30 for
So we're back at 11:30. Thanks.
Very good. Oh no, our current one we have not. So it just occurred to me, this conversation 4 years ago.